an astral shell. This is something that I think is going to ride very closely with some of that explanation there. So that one particularly catches my interest. And really a good description. I'm going to read, first of all, I'm going to show you what Steiner would have looked like in 1894 at the age of 33 when these lectures by Harrison took place. This is Steiner in that period.
Excellent.
And you could see that certainly, you could see him showing up on this London circuit as the head of this Borean society and giving those lectures, or someone closely connected with him, but certainly age-wise, it falls right in the pocket there. Later, of course, Steiner is directly connected with Annie Besant, who will put him in charge of the German wing of Theosophy. I want to say a couple things about Besant. She was an exceptional personality. She was manipulated dramatically, but at a certain point, she gets manipulated by this Hindu group which wants political action in India, and she does in fact help Gandhi, create freedom in India and home rule. But some of the forces, the political forces, get away from the spiritual aspects going on there. Now, here's what's very interesting, and you find out so many things. The story around Krishnamurti and Annie Besant is quite fascinating because she decides with Ledbetter and these strange Hindu groups that the world teacher needs to come now and not in the 21st century as Blavatsky had envisioned it. Now they decide they're going to push through, Lord Maitreya, and that the vehicle is going to be this advanced Hindu boy, Krishnamurti. And Krishnamurti was quite fascinating indeed. But when that all fails, and Krishnamurti says, I'm going to dissolve Theosophy in this order of the star they set up for me, I'm done with this whole thing. He got very discouraged when they were feeding him messages, when he had these different meetings to take, etc. And his brother was sick, had pneumonia. And they said, oh, he'll be fine, don't worry about it. The masters told us he's going to be okay. And so he takes this boat ride to give these lectures in India, and his brother Nitya dies. This disillusionment allowed him to see through the kind of opportunism that was happening there. That's when he goes into the dissolving the order of the star and these other things. But what I found interesting, and many of you may not know, is that Ledbetter and Besant in 1932, after failing to force this whole world teacher through Krishnamurti and, greatest intentions in the world, but it is forcing your will on the world, they claimed that Blavatsky had come back through a boy who was drowning at the age of 15 years old, and Blavatsky slipped into his body and was going to, now that was going to be the world teacher. And so there was a quick,
wow, so she was a walk-in.
Yeah. Now,
wow.
This is interesting. That Hindu group, which was behind this, what I believe, behind this original push to move Theosophy into a totally Eastern system and eliminate the Western Christian aspect. This is very interesting because I think that this was all a strange charade by these Hindus to do this, and using an elderly now Blavatsky and Ledbetter to try to pull it off, because what happens is they decide after a little while nobody's buying this, and then they're like, oh, well, the boy went off to study with the masters and he's not going to be the world teacher, don't worry about it. That's strange, and it shows that they were hooked on this idea really until very late, like very close to their own deaths, that they were still pushing this idea of the world teacher coming through. And so their obsession with having the world teacher come through a body and preparing it that way, and their own impatience around this was the undoing of Theosophy. But you can see that, as advanced as they were in other areas, this is the temptation really to, kind of play God, as it were. Absolutely fascinating. Okay, now Steiner and what he has to say to us about the eighth sphere and AI, and then your questions. And Miss Olivia, how are you doing out there?
Doing great. I got great stuff.
Excellent. Okay. So remember, AP Senate mentions the eighth sphere. Blavatsky publicly reprimands him. He comes back, and instead of improving on it, he does kind of a worse version of it. Senate will fade in the background, and then out will come C.G. Harrison. Somehow it's connected to Steiner, don't know how. And he will come out in 1894 and correct the whole situation on one level, but also say, I know I need to be guarded in my language, etc. But there's a lot of anthroposophy, before anthroposophy, in Harrison's piece. And Steiner will speak of him in such glowing terms that you can see it's either a huge influence on him, or he knows him, or it's him. So Steiner gives us really quite a mystery there to go along with. And what he's saying is that the human being has this spirituality that they can cultivate. And what happens is it's drawn, and I'll use some of Steiner's actual sketches, it is drawn away, and the harmonic forces aim at the individual to draw it into these eight spheres. This is one of the shots of a human being being targeted in this fashion. Coming up later will be Crowley's kind of version of this whole thing, kind of embracing the eighth sphere, and the character Lamb really being an inhabitant of this very same type of plane. We can think of Lamb as an actual inhabitant of the eighth sphere. And what is it that Crowley calls him? The way. Well, he's the way into the eighth sphere. And, we've said it again on the show, the incredible resemblance of Lamb with the whole gray alien piece cannot be underestimated or avoided. Another inhabitant and the creator of that eighth sphere environment, that's Steiner's sculpture of Arma. So we get the hint there of Steiner, investing directly and showing us, this is what this looks like. This is my best artistic interpretation of this thing. And it was funny because while he's spending that time, and he's a great sculptor, interestingly enough, but while he's spending that time doing it, he starts to feel like he's being embedded in concrete himself. When he tunes into Arma, he feels a heaviness. This is the heavy materialism of this harmonic force. A couple of things here. This is 1915, the best lecture that Steiner gave on the eighth sphere. I'll give you a little bit of this and then your question. Okay. let's do this. October 18th, 1915. Now, this is Steiner. It's very difficult, indeed, to speak of the so-called eighth sphere, which was referred to openly for the first time by Mr. Sinnott. One cannot say that he gave information about it, for what he said was a fallacy. You can certainly realize why it's difficult to speak about this subject. For again, it must be emphasized that our language has been coined for the outer material world, and the eighth sphere was regarded as a secret matter until it was mentioned by Sinnott. In another place, Steiner will say it was one of the top secret, if not the main secret of the mystery schools. Harrison, as you might recall, said it was the key to understanding evil. That's pretty dramatic. It means the eighth sphere is not something just like looking at the planetary chain of evolution or something. It's got a very deep association with humanity. Consequently, there are not many words that can be used for characterizing the eighth sphere. The fact that all mention was avoided for so long will also enable you to realize what is involved when one speaks of it. You will therefore have to take the aphoristic remarks I shall make today as a kind of introductory exposition, given with the object of throwing out certain indications, which to begin with can only be a small contribution to the subject. It is to be hoped, however, that there will be opportunities for saying more some later time. There's always this hint that you're going to get more later if you demonstrate that you can absorb this information on a level and not abuse it or be confused by it. So this happens over and over again around the eighth sphere. As a matter of fact, if you compare this with what Harrison wrote in 1894, 21 years earlier, it almost sounds like exactly the same thing, as if they've both been sat down and given the speech in the mystery school. Like, when you get around the eighth sphere, this is how you approach it. You'll have realized in the lecture yesterday that the eighth sphere cannot be anything that belongs to the material world, for I have shown you that the greatest fallacy in Sinnott's statement is that the physical moon is directly connected to the eighth sphere. I try to make it comprehensible that the actual foundation of the error consists in the fact that this pointed to something material and physical. From this, you'll be able to conjecture, if not fully understand, that what is called the eighth sphere can have nothing directly to do with anything within the material world. That is to say, what can be perceived by man's senses or thought out on the basis of sensory perception has no part in the eighth sphere. So it'll be useless to look for the eighth sphere anywhere in the material world. This is a realm that is based on the projection of clairvoyant vision and thought and imagination. You now have indications by means of which some approach can be made in thought to a conception of the eighth sphere. I've said the eighth sphere is something to do with the residue left from the old moon and its evolution. So much you can gather from the studies you have pursued in the course of time that we have pursued. I tried to make it clear in the lecture yesterday that on the old moon, man's natural mode of perception was visionary and imaginative in character, so that any substantiality to be discerned in the eighth sphere must be found with this kind of vision. That is to say, it must be presumed at the outset that the eighth sphere is found. I'm going to say it again. That is to say, it must be presumed at the outset that the eighth sphere is found by way of visionary imagination. This is interesting because what he's telling us is, first of all, you need to know this is all about a realm you project yourself into. So it's a spiritual mental place, and it doesn't have physical materiality the way that we understand that. That's why looking for the eighth sphere is not something that we can do on a physical basis. However, it's being formed and will take on a material aspect. The problem is, the way that we understand materiality, we'd be looking for like a version of the moon out there. Now, it's interesting because Steiner actually takes a crack at showing its relationship to us. And there's a very simple drawing that he put there, but you can see down here that the eighth sphere overlaps directly with the Earth, and that this is the developmental stage that we're in the middle of. The problem with the eighth sphere is that it's been artificially created in the Steiner cosmology. It's been artificially created by this harmonic force. Here we are moving on this totally different spiritual evolutionary track, and this thing shows up to suck us in. So it could suck us in through war. It can, suck us in through these various things, glamorization. And so the goal of it is to take the human essence and spirit it away into the eighth sphere, where Ahriman is the master of the realm. And, there's the polarity of Ahriman and Lucifer. And I won't get into the Luciferic part because it will take us off track. But what's important, I think, to consider, what Steiner's trying to get across, is when you get into this period where the harmonic manipulation of the human race starts to get us technologically pulled in through virtual reality, through giving everyone their own clairvoyance, a la the internet, a la a chip in our brain and all the rest of it, that you're at the doorway of the eighth sphere. And with that, Miss Olivia, we're going to take your questions.
Okay, we're going to start with this one. Cameron, do you think Steiner was destined to live longer and have a bigger impact on society, but was thwarted by adversarial powers, or was he destined to die at 65, having given everything?
Yeah, he dies at 64, and he is actually poisoned, which doesn't kill him immediately, but over time weakens his, you could say, his immune system. I would say that's a really interesting question. My own way of looking at it is I would agree with you that he was meant to be around longer and have he has this dramatic impact, but obviously had he been here, it would have been different. There's two interesting things that come up along this line. One is that Steiner himself mentioned to his doctor, Ida Wigman, that when he spent time in the spiritual realm, physically, he deteriorated to a certain degree by spending too much time there and not sort of embodying his physical life. So he's going over into the spiritual realm, he's doing all this work, and he's bringing that work back, but his physical shell is deteriorating on a certain basis. So this process was happening. It's very interesting because during World War II, Edgar Cayce will give a series of readings, and the source always warned him to do 2 a day, but because he kept getting these mail sacks of people wanting to know about loved ones in World War II and stuff, he got obsessed with satisfying everyone. And so he was doing 10 readings a day, and the reading source itself started to say, if you don't stop, you're going to deteriorate because you're operating with this very high psychic frequency, and you have like a physical interface with it. But if you're doing it 10 times a day, the charge is too high and it's going to defeat you physically. And in fact, Casey dies, at 67. Um, so, this is the type of thing. However, you can imagine the incredible karma that he amasses on a positive side by doing this and helping all these people and doing, 10 readings a day. The same thing could be said of Steiner, which is, it seems like there's almost like a rushing in the final few years of his life to set everything right. As a matter of fact, he tries to reincorporate anthroposophy, which I find fascinating, and he tries to almost make it into something else because he's very concerned about where it's headed then. So when we look at it that way, these people were dynamic enough to know, okay, I'm going to take the sacrifice upon myself. And if you look in 1915, at the onset of World War I, Steiner says the time for kind of going along nicely, studying these spiritual things has passed. We have to realize now that with spiritual science, there are forces that are kind of arrayed against us. And so we're going to be playing defense. This is kind of an important thing, I think, in the period that we're in, to have a similar kind of mindset. And I know people are already kind of wound up as it is, but having some kind of extra insight around the idea that the forces that are arrayed against humanity at this period are really tuned up on a very high level. They're kind of going for broke. And so I kind of feel a little echo in Steiner's statement about, the time of just kind of going along with this. We have to be moving along with the teaching, yes, but we have to be aware that on the playing field, there are forces that are arrayed against us because of the direction we're going in. That's a good point. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist X series. This is X series 169, the 8th Sphere AI Warning, Kona Blue UFO File.